As you can see, the focus of the murderer's attack was on the woman's sexual organs. Using what appears to have been a large clasp knife...
Thank you, Doctor. There's no need to be vivid.
So it was always a bit surprising to me that this film was a little bit of a disaster when it arrived in 1967. It struggled to make any money by all accounts, despite having a dream cast of acting mega talent. Maybe it was still a bit too early for people to be interested in a murder mystery thriller that takes place in the upper echelons of the Third Reich. Maybe it was the thought of Golden Boy Peter O'Toole, Lawrence of Arabia himself, as an unhinged Nazi lunatic. So stunningly filmed on location in previously occupied Poland, this is one of my personal favourite films from the 60s and one that's massively neglected these days. Let's take a look at Night of the Generals. So Night of the Generals kicks off in 1942 in occupied Poland as Operation Barbarossa is nearing Moscow and Polish partisans are tormenting occupying forces. A local hears a scream in his tenement block and hides in a toilet where he catches a glimpse of a man's red striped military trousers, the uniform of a German general. Emerging, he finds the body of a prostitute that's been stabbed to death. Turns out this prostitute was also a Nazi informant and therefore Major Grau, a brilliant Omar Sharif of military intelligence, is sent to investigate.
That woman's Polish, isn't she? This is not the case for the German authorities.
Her name was Kupiecka. Maria Kupiecka.
Kupiecka? Oh, yes, she was a prostitute and a good friend to us.
She was also a German agent.
Now, the unusual and interesting part of the film is that in the middle of his investigation, Omar Sharif's major is transferred out of Poland and into Paris, and frustratingly isn't given the opportunity to solve the case. So it's here the film jumps forward a couple of years and the three generals who were under suspicion also find their duties take them to Paris, where a newly promoted Sharif eagerly awaits reopening his case.
Good to see you again, Colonel.
You once had the vision to transfer me to Paris.
We do our best to give pleasure, Colonel. Good day.
I understand we're soon to be joined by General Tanz. Quite like old times.
Now, it is a murder mystery, so I can't really give away too much more, but I can say that the murderer is soon identified and the other two suspects both are embroiled in a plot to assassinate Hitler, which if you've seen the Tom Cruise film Valkyrie, you'll be familiar with. And even though it's a bit odd that the film takes this plot detour, I suppose it does ground the film in a real historical time and place.
Nobody could live through that. Back to Berlin.
So for the three generals, we have Charles Grey, who played Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever. Here he plays General von Seydlitz-Gabler, head of the city's military garrison, who doesn't mind the odd liaison with a prostitute or two. Then we have Donald Pleasance, who also played Blofeld, as General Karlenberger. His chief of staff seems the most likely at first, as he has a creepy, secretive nature and no real personal attachments. And finally, General Tanz, played by Peter O'Toole, in charge of a special division of the SS. He's been personally selected by Hitler to put a stop to the Polish resistance, which he does with relish. Now, I absolutely love Peter O'Toole in Night of the Generals. He's an absolutely ferocious lunatic in this. So that in itself will be a great cast, but it doesn't end there. So we have the lovely Joanna Pettet, who falls for a young corporal, played by Tom Courtenay, who is assigned to be O'Toole's driver and companion in the city. Courtney's great in this. I don't think he gets enough recognition as an actor in general. He, along with Omar Sharif, were both fresh from Dr. Zhivago. And The Night of the Generals is also unusual as an English language film about World War II from the German side, standing up with a relative handful of such works like Sam Peckinpah's Cross of Iron, which I've reviewed on this channel, link in the description, and whilst we're on the subject. Hi, I'm Stephen at Real Classic Film Reviews. If you've seen Night of the Generals, what did you think of it? And if you like films like this, then hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more reviews just like it. So Night of the Generals was based loosely on a novel by Hans Helmut Kirst, a German writer who was one of the first post-war writers to confront his country's resentment of the whole Nazi era. Despite its setting, Night of the Generals isn't a typical war movie. There's barely any combat really, rather it's actually a military/serial killer film, and I'm not sure how many of those that there actually are.
What happens if the murderer really is a general?
What happens? Well, justice is blind, my dear Inspector. Justice cannot see the red stripe or the gold braid. But justice can sometimes hear the cry of a murdered woman.
For me personally, the most interesting part of the film is the setting of a murder investigation in the middle of Nazi-occupied Poland. So by definition, even Omar Sharif's investigator is no saint. But for a Nazi anyway, he shows more compassion than his suspects. The fact that the murderer is not killing because he's a Nazi, but because he's actually criminally insane, is about as much as a motive as we get. So it's a pretty gripping drama, despite most of the action taking place just in offices and bars. What little actual action there is involves a cameo by Christopher Plummer as Field Marshal Rommel, getting gunned down, and Peter O'Toole's jaw-dropping extermination of a Warsaw ghetto.
A few more minutes.
So how do we find a character to root for in a story full of Nazis? Who are the good guys for us to cheer on? Now, no spoilers, but there is a twist or two in the third act that does kind of rob us of having a 100% Nazi-sided story, but otherwise the film does a good job of highlighting that despite their politics and actions being obviously despicable, the German soldiers at the time still had that job to do and orders and protocol to follow. But morality and politics of that whole era of history are for another video and another time. So Night of the Generals was one of the last films made by Russian director Anatole Litvak, who you've probably never heard of, but he was a prolific director of crime films throughout the 30s and 40s, who got the job because he owned the rights to the novel that it was based on. And this was the first time that a major American studio was allowed to film in communist Poland, but only after Peter O'Toole's role later in the film was switched from an East German general to a neo-Nazi leader in West Germany. The film feels like a big production. The Polish army provided a huge amount of their own troops to play German soldiers, as well as donating weapons, tanks and vehicles. So as long as it's a superb cast, this film does have some great mid to late movie plot revelations that sometimes can be a bit jarring, but at least attempt to take things in a direction that you might not expect. Night of the Generals doesn't get much attention these days, but I'm a huge fan of it. Go check it out.